Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of the AWS Cognito tutorial. In this video, we're going to be setting up the registration and login functionality, as well as setting up an application-wide auth state to hold authentication status and user info that can be passed down to all components. All right, let's get started. All right, guys, so I think the way we're going to approach this is first we're going to implement the registration functionality. That way we can have a user in the system that we could then use to log in. So we'll do registration first and then login. All right, now the way registration works is our form will collect a username, an email, and a password. And once the user is registered, they'll receive an email with a confirmation link. Now, they won't be able to log into the system with their new credentials until they confirm registration with that email link. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our code editors and start to wire up the registration. All right, now once you find your project, go ahead and drill into the source folder, components, auth, and then we're looking for register.js. All right. So starting from the top of the file, the first thing we want to do is pull in the auth object from AWS Amplify. Now this is the object that we'll call methods such as sign up, sign in, log out, things like that. So we can use destructuring syntax to pull in auth from AWS Amplify. Oops, that should be a dash, not an equal sign. There we go. All right, so far so good. So let's go ahead and scroll down to our form submit handler, and we're looking for this little comment here that says AWS Cognito integration here. So let's go right below that, make a new line. And so we're going to be using async await to call our sign up method here. So let's start with a try catch block. Try catch. This will take an error. All right, that looks good. Let's start with the try clause first. All right, so actually before we do that, what we want to do is extract some of the state objects. We can also use destructuring syntax here to pull out the various things that we want to pass in to our method, such as username, email, and password. All right, so let's do username, email, and password. Okay, and that is going to come from this .state. Now remember, when the user fills out the form and submits it, this handler, actually it's this onInputChange, is going to set that user input into state. So right here, we're just extracting it from state so we can then pass into our Cognito function call. All right. All right, so let's go into our try. And first we want to set the a variable for the response after we call sign up. So let's call this sign up response. Okay, and this will just contain some data regarding the user that's been signed up into the system. All right, so then we can say await auth dot sign up. Okay. All right, and that's going to take an object. We're going to pass in a couple of things here. So username, and this is coming from up here, you know, what we've extracted from state. Username, email, comma. And then it's going to take an email attribute. I'm sorry, that should be password. Username, password, and email is an attribute because username and password are required, but attributes are optional fields that we can specify when we set up our user pool. All right, so since we have the ability to sign in using username or email, we're going to add email as an attribute here. So email, just like that. All right, so far so good. Don't forget your semicolon here if you're into that kind of thing. All right, so in our catch, we'll just do some simple error handling here. So let's say this .state, and what we're going to do is if we get an error message or an error object, we're going to set that into state, into the appropriate place. So in state, we have an errors object. Actually, I can show you this before we code it. If you scroll back up to the top, where is it? See, in our primary state object, we've got properties for username, email, password, and so forth. And then we have an errors object, and we're populating any Cognito errors, as well as validation errors, such as blank field or a mismatch with the password. All right, so back down here, let's see, what do we want to do? So we'll say this.state.errors. In other words, whatever errors are already in state, we want to preserve that. And then if there's a Cognito error, Cognito error. Okay. Let me just take a look at that to make sure that looks good. All right, so there's one more bit of logic I want to add to our error handling code. And the reason for that is because sometimes the value of this error object is the text error message exactly, and sometimes it's under error.message. So we need about 2 lines of code here just to normalize that, because the bindings in our front end are always going to expect the error message to be under error.message. So let's create a temporary variable here, or I should say a new variable, not temporary. This is going to hold our ultimate error message, so we'll just set it to null right now. And then we'll use a ternary operator to check to see if the error object contains a .message property. So we'll say if there's no error.message, then we'll create one and set it under this new ERR variable. Okay, so we'll say message error. Okay, so we're setting the expected format if it doesn't already have it. Otherwise, it's fine, and we'll just set error to our ERR variable. That way we don't need logic to toggle between the two, and we can always set this to ERR down here. Make sense? All right, so I think we are looking good here. Now what we can do is go to the website and actually try to register a user. So make sure you save this and go ahead and pull up the browser. And let's click on register in the top right-hand corner. So enter any username that you want. Okay, enter an email address. Make sure this is a real email address too, because you're going to have to go and click on the confirmation link, all right? Now remember the password requirements. We need a numbers, letters, at least 1 capital letter, and at least 1 special character, all right? So enter in, make sure you confirm your password. All right, I'm going to open up the console here just so we can see. Let's see, actually, let me check something real quick. Let me go back to the code. Yeah, we should probably console log our sign-up response just so we can take a look at it. So let's see, I'll go right underneath here. Console log sign-up response. Oh, and almost forgot one other thing that we want to do here is redirect to the welcome page, because we have some messaging on the welcome page saying, hey, we've sent you an email, go ahead and check it and click on the confirmation link. All right, so we'll do this.props history.push, and this is just a React way of redirecting. If you haven't seen this before, don't worry too much. And /welcome. All right, so that's going to redirect them to the welcome page once they've signed up. All right, now let's go ahead and make one change here. On line 47, attribute should actually be plural, so add a S there to make it attributes, and save. And on line 56, where it says this.state, let's change that to set state, all right? Because in React, we don't set the state directly. We've got to do it via this utility function, set state. So go ahead and make those 2 changes, save the file, and let's go back to the browser and try to submit this form. All right, so username, email, password, and confirm password. All right, and I'm going to open up DevTools just in case we get an error. Let's go ahead and click on register. Okay, and we've got another error. Lovely. Cannot perform specific action because there does not exist a valid pool domain associated with the user pool. Oh, did we not set up our domain in our user pool? All right, let's go back to our AWS console, and let's go back into Cognito. And if you're just coming to Cognito again, I'll just show you how to do that. So let's click on Manage User Pools. Let's click into our Hexal user pool, and we want to go down to Domains. I guess we didn't save this, or maybe we didn't do it before. All right, so this is basically the domain that our client application is going to use whenever it makes any REST calls to the Cognito API via Amplify. So let's just say Hexal in lowercase, and we can go ahead and save changes. Okay, now we should be good to try this again. All right, so let's go back to our app, and let's just clear this, and let's hit register one more time. User already exists. All right, so a few little speed bumps here, but that's all right. We're getting there. So it looks like it actually did create the user. So I'm going to have to go back to my AWS console, and let's click on Users and Groups. So this is good anyway to see. So what happens once you create the user, we can see it here in our users table. And you see where it says unconfirmed here? Well, once we check our email and click on that link, this will change to confirmed. So for now, let's click on the username. Let's go ahead and disable the user and then delete the user. That way we're starting from a clean slate and we can go back to our app and try it again. All right, so let's do that. All right, and if your form's already filled out, just go ahead and click on register. Otherwise, go ahead and fill it in again. All right, finally, success. Okay, so we've got redirected to the welcome page. And you know what? I probably need to add some verbiage here to say go check your email. But that is the next step, to check our email. So one other thing to notice is we're outputting our user object down here. And as you can see, it's got our username. It's got some information about the session, about the user pool, etc. All right, a bunch of information in here. So that's a good indication that our user has been created. Let's actually go back to Cognito and verify that. So we can just refresh here under Users and Groups. There we go. So it's Jay Spruance, unconfirmed. Now I'm going to go to my email and look for that confirmation link. Okay, let me switch to my other box here. All right, and there it is. So it should say your verification link. Go ahead and click on that, and go ahead and click on the verify email link. All right, your registration has been confirmed. So let's go back to Cognito and let's refresh this. And there we go. Now our account status is confirmed. So we've successfully created a user in our Amazon Cognito user pool. And now we have basically everything we need to go ahead and log in. So that's the next step, to integrate our login and give our application login functionality. All right, so before we set about wiring up the login, let's go ahead and change that verbiage on the welcome page. So let's go back to our code editor. Let's pop open welcome.js, and let's just add a new paragraph tag here. Let's say, we've sent you an email. Please click on the confirmation link to verify your account. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save that. All right, perfect. So now let's go ahead and set up our login functionality. I'm going to close this file for now, and I'm going to pop open our login.js. All right, now the changes we need to make to this file are going to be very similar to what we did with register.js. In fact, we're going to go ahead and copy and paste some code over. So let's start with that import statement. We can go back to register and just copy the auth destructuring statement here. And let's go ahead and paste that in a new line underneath our last import. All right, and save that. Now let's go back to register, and we're just going to copy and paste the entire try catch, basically everything under our comment here. So let's go ahead and just grab the try catch, and then we'll modify from there. All right, so let's go flip over to login. And again, look for that same comment, AWS Cognito integration here. Let's go underneath that, and let's do a paste. All right, so first of all, we need to change our variable here. Now, when a user logs into the system, it returns a user object if that login was successful. All right, so we'll be getting a user object back. All right, and we can change the sign-up method to sign in. Auth.sign in. All right, so far so good. So with this one, let's go ahead and delete everything in the parentheses for the sign-in arguments, and we'll start from scratch here. So we're just going to say this.state.username. This function takes just 2 arguments rather than an object. All right, so this.state.password for the other one. All right, so that's it, just one line there. And let's change the console log to user. So we'll log that user object once our sign-in is successful. And for the redirect, let's just redirect them to the home page. So just change that /welcome to a /. All right. In terms of the error handling, we can leave everything as is, I believe. Yep, that looks good. That should work. All right, so with that, that's all we need to do for now. Let's go ahead and save that and attempt to log in. So let's flip over to the browser. Where were we? I'm going to close my email here. And let's navigate over to login from the top right-hand corner. All right, so hopefully you remembered your username and your password. So go ahead and fill in the form, and mine's auto-populated, as you can see. So I'm just going to click on login. All right, and that looks like it's working well. So I'm redirected to the home page, and as you can see down here, it's returned a Cognito user object. And that's got my username. That's got just a bunch of stuff related to the user pool. So that is a good sign. Now what we need to do in terms of the next step is add some kind of visual indication in the client app that we're actually logged in. So some things that we can do, we're going to do some modifications to the nav bar here, and we're going to print out the username right just to the left of these buttons here when a user's logged in. And we're also going to add a logout button, and we're going to hide the register and login buttons when the user is logged in. So in order to do that, because the nav bar up here is a different component, all right? So it's not necessarily going to know anything about this user that's logged in. So we need to add some kind of global state so that all of the components kind of know, A, if a user's logged in, and B, what that user is. All right, so we're going to add that next. All right, so back in our code editor, let's go ahead and go under the source folder, and we're looking for the app.js file. All right, where is it? There it is. All right, so app.js is the one root parent component that all of the other components are brought in under. Okay, so this is a great place for us to set some kind of global state in our application with regards to authentication. All right, so let's go directly under our class definition here. Okay, and let's create a state object. So state equals, and set this to an empty object. And then inside of that, we need 2 properties. We want one property to track the authentication state of the application, and another property to hold the user object, okay, the user information. So the first one, let's do is authenticated. And this is going to be a Boolean value, so let's set it to false initially. Okay. And the next one, let's just do user and set that to null. All right. So now we need a couple of helper functions to allow us to change these properties. So the way this is going to work, basically, our login component, once a user authenticates, is going to set this property to true and set this property to the user object returned by AWS Amplify. All right, so let's set up our helper functions. Let's do set auth status. Okay. All right, this will be a Boolean value that's passed into the function. And inside here, we'll do this dot set state, and we'll set our is authenticated property. We'll set that to authenticated, okay, which is the parameter that's being passed in to the function. All right, that looks good. Now let's do another one for user. So we'll call this one set user. Okay, this one's going to take in a user object. And similarly to what we did above, we'll do this dot set state, and we'll set that user object. User equals user. Okay. All right, so far so good. So now what we need to do, we're using something called React Router to basically to associate a route with a component. All right, so when we type in /login, React application loads the login component. So we need a way to sort of bundle up all these properties, the state and these helper functions, and pass them into each component so that they all have access to this right here in app.js. All right, so the first thing we want to do is create one object that contains these two helper functions as well as our state properties. So what we can do is go right underneath render here, create a new variable. We'll call this auth props. All right, set this to an object. And then inside here, we'll basically have one property for each of these state properties and for each of these helper functions. All right, so I'm going to just start copying some of these in here. Is authenticated. And this is going to be this dot state dot is authenticated, since that's a state property. Same thing for user. User is going to be this dot state dot user. Okay. Then we'll copy in these two function names. And same thing, this dot state dot function name, set auth status. And one more for set user. So I'll copy that down here. And I'll say this dot state dot set user. Okay, great. So now we've got all of these properties bundled into one object called auth props. Now the next thing we need to do is pass these into each component. So we can use a special render syntax to pass properties to each component rather than using the component attribute. And I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so for the navbar, that's our first component that will need this. So we'll just set an attribute called auth props. Okay. And we'll pass in auth props. All right, so now all of these object properties will be available from the navbar. This one's a little bit more straightforward since it's not a route, it's just a component include. And the routes are going to look a little bit differently. So let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so in order to pass my properties into the route specified components here, what I want to do is replace this component equals home or component equals whatever the component is with a render function. All right, and then pass the properties as an argument into that render function. And I'll show you what that looks like. So first, let's do home. We're going to go ahead and get rid of this component equals. All right, and let's type in render equals. Okay. And then this is going to return a component. So this will be our home component. Okay, and we can add our properties here as an attribute. Auth equals, oops, this should be curly braces. Auth props. All right. End component, curly brace, and end component. So this first one is for home, and this last one is for the route. All right. All right, so that will make all of these auth properties available in our home component. In other words, all of these properties. All right. Now there's one more thing I want to add here, because when we do this, we overwrite any of the other default properties that would have been passed to home. And I'll show you what I mean. So in other words, something like props.location or props.history will not be available now that we're passing this in. So what I can do is pass props in as an argument, whoops, in here, okay, and then include it here using the spread operator. So props, just like that. All right, so now I'm getting all of my default props as well as my auth props. All right, so what I'm going to do is kind of copy and paste this down the line here and replace all of these component equals with our new render function. I'm going to pause the video while I do that and then come back once it's complete. All right, so that's complete now. So hopefully I don't have any typos anywhere in here. That was a lot of typing. And hopefully yours looks the same. So now that we've got all of this wired up with our global state, we should be able to read in these properties here from authProp from basically any component in the application. So let's put that to the test and let's go to our navbar, our global navigation, and sort of hide some of those buttons depending on the logged in state and also show the username on the page. All right, so let's go ahead and pop open navbar.js. All right, so the first thing we want to do is display the username when somebody's logged in, okay, when the user's logged in. So we can do that, let's see. Why don't we do that right before the register and login buttons? Okay, so I'm going to go right underneath navbar item here on line 27. And we can just do some conditional rendering here based on some of these properties. So let's look for the isAuthenticated property first. So let's say this.props.auth.isAuthenticated. All right. And then let's also make sure that we do have a user object in context so that we can output the name. So we'll say this.props, now because these are properties being passed into the component, so whereas before we were accessing these things via this state, now we're accessing them from this.props, all right? auth.user. All right, so we're basically saying if somebody's logged in and if they are a valid user, then, and we'll display the name. So we can use another AND operator here and then use our parentheses to output our HTML with the username. Okay, so let's tighten this up a little bit. All right. And what am I missing here? Oh, I don't need that. All right, so let's go in here and let's do a paragraph. And let's just say hello, and let's output the username. So we'll say this.props.auth.user.username. And we'll close our p tag there. All right, should we keep going or should we try this out first? Let's try this first. All right, so let's save the file. All right, let's go back to our application. Oh, and looks like I do have an error here. I misspelled change password confirm. Let me just fix that real quick. So I got to go back to app. I knew there'd be a typo somewhere in here. Change password, here it is. All right, let me save that and hopefully we'll be good to go. Cannot read property is authenticated of undefined. This is in navbar line 28 of undefined. All right, let me check that again. Line 28, line 28. This.props.auth.isAuthenticated. So that tells me it's not able to read auth. Let me go back to my app.js. All right. Oh, I see the problem. This should be auth, not auth props. All right, so we'll change that to auth. Again, I'm back in app.js, if you didn't catch that, on line 46. Okay, let's try this one more time. That looks better. Okay, so let's go on over to the login page. And let's just attempt to log in. And so we're expecting to see our username right here, just to the left of the register button. So let's try that out. Log in. And I've got nothing. All right, so let's see what's going on here. Oh, of course. All right, so before we can expect to see anything, we actually need to set the isAuthenticated property and the user. So let's go over to login.js. I missed a step here. All right, so what we need to do, basically once the user is logged in, we need to set these properties. So let's go to our handle submit function in our try catch. All right, let's go right below our console log on line 40. And what we need to do is this dot props dot auth, and here we're invoking our auxiliary function, which is set auth status. Set auth status. Okay. And we want to set that to true. All right, and then we also want to set the user object. So this dot props dot auth dot user. Oh, set user, and we'll pass in user there. All right, so that looks correct to me. So now we should be actually setting these things once we log in. And that way our nav bar will be able to read in the proper parameters. So let's save that. Let's go back to the browser and let's try this again. So I'm going to go to login, and I'm going to go ahead and click on login. This.props.auth.set auth status is not a function. So I guess I spelled that wrong. Set auth status. So somehow it's not seeing that as a function. So let's retrace our steps here. All right, so from login, this.props.auth.set auth status, that looks correct. So from app.js, let's make sure we're passing everything in correctly. Login, auth equals auth props, that looks correct. Oh, I see the problem. All right, you guys probably saw this before me, but these are not under state. All right, the two functions should be just this dot function. Okay, only these two properties are stored under state, so these two are just kind of hanging out underneath the main class definition. So that's the problem. Go ahead and save that, and let's give it another try. All right, third time's a charm, I hope. And there we go. Hello, username. All right, cool. So we're showing the username. We should probably add a little bit of padding in here, so let me do that real quick. Navbar. Let's see. I'll tell you what, I'll add some left margin to the buttons class. So let me just do a quick and dirty change here just to make that look a little bit nicer. Say buttons. Let's say margin left equals 1 EM. Save that and let's refresh. There, much better. All right, so the next thing I want to do, and this video is kind of getting a little bit long, so we'll just do this one last quick change and then cut it off there. So I want to hide these two buttons when I'm logged in and show a logout button instead of these two. So let's go back to our navbar.js. All right, so we just need some conditional rendering to hide these two when we're logged in. So let's go right underneath line 33, buttons, and let's do, all right, so we need to check if the user is not authenticated. So let's do a bang this.props.auth is authenticated. Okay, and our curly braces, and we'll just kind of copy and paste these two buttons into this condition here. Oops. Okay. Let's see, what is it complaining about here? Must have one parent element. Ah, okay, so it doesn't like the fact that there are two. Basically, in JSX, they want you to have only one single parent element, so let's just do a quick and dirty fix here. I'll just wrap this in a div, and that should solve the problem. There we go. All right, now I want to add a log out button as well. So I'm going to just copy and paste the login button and put it right down here. Okay, and I'll just change this to log out, and I'll change the redirect to just a slash. And so this time we want to have the opposite condition. So I'm just going to copy and paste this from above and just remove that bang. All right, so we're saying if the user is authenticated, then let's give them the log out button. Okay, and we'll just close that with braces and go ahead and save that. All right, cool. So now when we log in, we should only see the log out button. Otherwise, we should see register and log in. So let's take a look and see if that's working. All right, so also one thing I should mention is you can see that we're not persisting the state here. That's because we need some kind of, and we'll do this in the next video, but we need to basically retrieve the authenticated state from local storage when we start up the application. Otherwise, it won't persist between pages. All right, so this is our logged out state. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and log in. And we'd expect to see our username and a log out button. Perfect. That looks great. All right, so all right, before we cut this video, let's just add the log out functionality. That shouldn't take too long. All right, so let's go back to our code editor and make sure you're in navbar.js. Down on our logout anchor tag, let's add an onClick. OnClick equals curly braces. And let's say handle logout. Handle logout. Okay, so when this gets clicked, we're going to say handle logout. All right, so now we need to define this function at the top. So let's scroll up to the top. And let's see, right underneath our component class definition on line 4, we can start to write this out. So let's see, I'm going to do handle logout. There's going to be an async function, all right. I'm going to pass in the event so we can say prevent default on that click, so that we don't navigate to the home page or anything. So I'll do event.prevent default, which you guys are probably familiar with that. And then right below that, we'll do our try catch. Okay. And let's see, catch. I'm just going to do a simplified catch error handling here. So let's just do console.log error.message. All right. All right, so back up into the try block, we need to call auth.signout, just like that. Now, the other thing we need to do is actually pull in the AWS Amplify library. So I'm going to do import auth from AWS-Amplify. Okay. Now, finally, the last thing we want to do after we actually log out is to set the isAuthenticated property back to false and set the user object back to null. So let's go to our login.js and let's copy those 2 lines, and then we'll just change the actual values. So I'm going to copy these from line 41 and 42. I'm going to paste that back right here in navbar, right underneath the auth.signout. All right, and set auth status, let's do false. And set user, let's do null. Okay, go ahead and save that. And let's try this out. Let's go back to the browser. All right, so we need to log in first and then log out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on login. All right, there's our username and logout button. Great. Let's click on logout. And there we go. We're back to our logged out state. Register and login buttons showing. All right, so this has been quite a long video with a lot of coding, so I think I'm going to stop it here. And in the next video, we'll just tie this up with a couple of extra goodies, such as forgot password and confirm password. Let's see, there's a forgot password page, there's a change password page, and then confirmations for both of those. So we'll tie this all together and complete those in the next video. So thanks for sticking with me, guys, through this, and hopefully see you in the next video.